There are few figures in American history as complex as divisive and as ultimately tragic as Richard Milhous Nixon. He was the consummate political survivor, a man forged in the crucible of the Great Depression, driven by a relentless ambition and a deep-seated resentment of the East Coast establishment. He was the scrappy vice president who saved his career with a televised speech about his dog Checkers. The man who lost a razor-thin election to John F. Kennedy, then declared his political career over, only to rise from the ashes 6 years later to claim the presidency. His time in office was one of profound consequence. He was a brilliant foreign policy strategist who courageously opened the door to China, a nation of 1 billion people, after decades of isolation. He negotiated landmark arms control treaties with the Soviet Union, beginning the process of détente that would lessen the threat of nuclear war. He created the Environmental Protection Agency and ended the Vietnam War. He was a president of immense and often overlooked substance. But he was also a man haunted by demons, a man of deep insecurities, profound paranoia, and a dark, brooding anger that he kept hidden behind a stiff, formal exterior. It was this darkness that would lead him and the nation into the abyss of Watergate. And watching it all from the pinnacle of power to the depths of disgrace were his 2 daughters. In 1974, as the world watched a U.S. president resigned in disgrace and boarded a helicopter for the last time, leaving a nation in turmoil. But left behind in the political wreckage of the Watergate scandal were his 2 daughters forced to live forever, with one of the most infamous and controversial names in modern history. How did they survive? In this video, we will tell the complete, deeply personal and politically charged stories of Tricia and Julie, the 2 daughters of President Richard Nixon. Born into the heart of American power, their lives were irrevocably shaped by their father's ambition, his historic triumphs, and his unprecedented catastrophic fall from grace. They responded to this shared trauma in 2 profoundly different and equally fascinating ways. We will explore the life of Tricia Nixon Cox, the elegant, reserved, and intensely private elder daughter. Once dubbed the White House Princess, she hosted a fairytale wedding in the Rose Garden, only to retreat almost completely from public life after her father's resignation, choosing a life of quiet, dignified, and near total silence. And we will delve into the incredible story of Julie Nixon Eisenhower, the fiercely loyal and resilient younger daughter who, during the darkest days of Watergate, stepped directly into the political firestorm. She became her father's most passionate, visible, and unwavering public defender, fighting a lonely, courageous battle for her family's name and honor. To bring you this definitive political and family drama, we have gone deep into presidential archives, the Watergate tapes, transcripts, historical news footage from the tumultuous early 1970s, and the insightful and revealing biographies written by Julie herself. This is the untold story of the family at the very heart of America's greatest and most painful political scandal. Number 2. Tricia Nixon Cox, the princess in a private castle. She was the blonde, beautiful, and serene Princess of the White House, a figure of quiet, almost ethereal elegance who seemed to float above the dirty, brutal business of politics. So why, after a fairy tale wedding broadcast to a captivated nation, did Tricia Nixon Cox choose to almost completely vanish from public view for the next 50 years? Becoming one of America's great political enigmas, Patricia Nixon, known to the world as Tricia, was born in 1946. As the firstborn daughter, her life was intertwined with her father's relentless political ascent from the very beginning. She grew up in the harsh glare of the public eye, a quiet, shy, and reserved child navigating the world of a congressman, a senator, and then for 8 long years, the vice president of the United States. She learned from a young age to guard her privacy, to keep her own counsel, to build a wall between her inner life and the outside world. When her father finally won the presidency in 1968, Tricia, then a young woman in her early 20s, stepped into the role of a modern-day princess. She was elegant, stylish, and intensely private, often seen as a stark, quiet contrast to the more politically engaged and outspoken children of previous administrations. She undertook her ceremonial duties with a quiet grace, accompanying her father on major diplomatic trips and hosting foreign dignitaries with a poise that impressed even her father's critics. Her most famous moment, the absolute zenith of her time in the public eye, came on a beautiful summer day, June 12, 1971. In a ceremony of national fascination, Tricia Nixon married the handsome, Harvard-educated lawyer Edward Finch Cox. And she did so in the first ever outdoor wedding held at the White House in the iconic and beautiful Rose Garden. It was a moment of manufactured Camelot for the Nixon administration, a beautiful romantic distraction from the escalating war in Vietnam and the growing political divisions tearing the country apart. The event was broadcast live and watched by over 100 million people. For a fleeting moment, Tricia was the most famous bride in the world, a fairy tale princess in a real-life palace. Throughout her father's tumultuous presidency, including the dark, suffocating, unraveling days of the Watergate scandal, Tricia remained a quiet but steadfastly loyal presence by his side. She never gave the fiery, combative press conferences her sister did, but her support for her parents was unwavering and absolute. She was there in the background of the photos, a silent, elegant pillar of support as her family's world crumbled around them. Then, after her father's resignation in August of 1974, Tricia Nixon Cox made a deliberate, life-defining choice. She retreated. Completely. She and her husband moved to New York City, where she dedicated herself to a life of profound, almost monastic privacy. She raised her son Christopher completely out of the public eye, giving him the gift of anonymity she never had. She focused her time on her family and quietly served on the boards of various medical research institutions and the Nixon Foundation. For nearly half a century, she has remained a near-total enigma. She has never written a memoir. She rarely gives interviews. She almost never makes public appearances. She has chosen to process her family's monumental public trauma in private, while her sister took on the public role of defender and historian. Tricia's story is one of a quiet, dignified, and lifelong withdrawal from the world that had built her up into a princess, only to watch as it brutally tore down her father, the king. Her silence is her story. While Tricia chose to process her family's public trauma in dignified silence and near total privacy, her younger sister Julie made the exact opposite decision. She chose to fight. She stepped directly into the political firestorm to become the last, the most public, and the most ferociously loyal soldier in the Nixon defense. Number 1. Julie Nixon. Eisenhower, the last loyal soldier. She married into one of America's most respected and beloved political families, uniting the legacies of Nixon and Eisenhower. But when her father's presidency began to crumble under the weight of the Watergate scandal, Julie Nixon Eisenhower would step out of her famous husband's shadow to become the most unlikely, the most courageous, and the most passionate defender of the most controversial president in modern American history. Born in 1948, Julie Nixon was the younger, more outgoing, and more overtly political of the two sisters. Her life became inextricably linked with another Republican dynasty in December of 1968, just a month after her father was elected president, when she married David Eisenhower, the grandson of President Dwight D. Eisenhower, for whom her father had served as vice president for 8 years. The union was a major national event, seen as the symbolic merging of two powerful and complex political legacies. During the early years of her father's presidency, Julie was a popular and active first daughter. She was a passionate advocate for children's issues and served as a goodwill ambassador for the nation. But her defining role, the one that would cement her place in American political history, began in earnest as the Watergate scandal erupted in 1973. As the White House walls began to close in on her father, as trusted aides resigned and testified against him as the threat of impeachment became a certainty, Julie became his primary and, at times, his only public defender. While the official White House press office was paralyzed and in disarray, the 25-year-old Julie launched a relentless, exhausting, one-woman campaign to save her father's presidency. She traveled the country, giving hundreds of interviews, holding impromptu press conferences, and facing down hostile crowds and deeply skeptical journalists with a poise and ferocity that stunned the seasoned veterans of Washington. She was articulate, she was meticulously informed on the details of the case, and she was absolutely, unshakably unwavering in her belief in her father's innocence. "The people who hate my father are not going to be happy until he is hanging from a chandelier," she once told a reporter. Her loyalty was primal. In an era before 24-hour cable news and an army of political surrogates, her role was unprecedented. She became the human face of the embattled White House, a daughter fighting with every fiber of her being for her father's political life and for her family's honor. Her courage was so admired that she was named one of the 10 most admired women in America for 2 consecutive years during this period. Even those who loathed her father had to respect her tenacity and her profound loyalty. After the resignation, Julie did not retreat like her sister. She remained a public figure, immediately dedicating herself to the monumental task of reshaping and defending her family's legacy. She became a prolific and acclaimed author, writing an intimate and deeply insightful biography of her mother titled Pat Nixon, The Untold Story, a book that finally gave voice to the woman who had stood so stoically in the shadows. She also wrote a book about her own experiences, Special People, and co-authored a book with her husband about their life in the White House. She has worked tirelessly with the Richard Nixon Presidential Library and Museum in Yorba Linda, California, ensuring that her father's full record, including his significant foreign policy achievements with China and the Soviet Union, is presented to the public. She has never shied away from defending his legacy, arguing that he was a complex and brilliant man who was ultimately undone by his political enemies and his own deep-seated personal flaws. Julie Nixon Eisenhower's life is a remarkable and uniquely American story of fierce, unwavering filial loyalty. She stood by her father in his darkest hour, and she has spent the rest of her life ensuring that his story as she sees it is the one that history remembers. Together, the lives of Tricia and Julie Nixon offer a powerful and fascinating study in loyalty, privacy, and the lifelong consequences of a political scandal that changed America forever. One chose silence, a retreat into a private castle to protect her peace. The other chose to fight, waging a public battle for her father's legacy. Both, in their own way, chose to survive. This theme of the children of a monumental American historical figure, whose legacy is a subject of intense national debate, is one we have explored before on this channel. In a previous video, we examined the incredible life of Frederick Douglass, a man who escaped the horrors of slavery to become one of the most important abolitionists, orators, and authors in the nation's history. We explored his brave struggle for freedom and his powerful world-changing impact on the course of American history. You can watch that essential story by clicking the link right here. And his children had to navigate their own complex legacy, living as the children of a black icon in a nation still grappling with the deep wounds and sins of slavery. We are currently developing a deep dive, Frederick Douglass's 5 Children, The Untold Story. To explore that incredible and important chapter of American history, be sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. You won't want to miss it.